welcome to Rising. We have a wonderful show planned for you today. I am really excited to talk about everything we're going to get into. Briahna, very nice to see you.
It's good to be back, Robby.
Well, let's kick it off.
Well, first up today, White House officials yesterday downplayed the Biden administration's own determination that lab leak is the most likely origin of COVID-19, pushing back against the Department of Energy's report as lacking consensus. Let's watch.
The president made trying to find the origins of COVID a priority right when he came into office. And he's got a whole of government effort designed to do that. There is not a consensus right now in the U.S. government about exactly how COVID started.
You said that right now there is not a consensus. Will there ever be a definitive answer from the Biden administration on the origins of COVID-19? And how much of that is dependent on cooperation from China?
We really do want to know what happened here, because the president wants to make sure that we're postured to prevent any future pandemics, or if not prevent them, to be able to get farther along ahead of them. So we're working very hard to understand this as best we can. Again, there's just no consensus across the government. The work continues, and I'm not going to get ahead of conclusions that haven't been arrived at yet.
Later, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre faced a grilling from Fox News' Jackie Heinrich over officials' previous dismissals of lab leak as a conspiracy theory. Let's hear what she had to say.
There was not so long ago a point where anyone asking the question of whether a lab leak was a credible theory that should be looked into, a lot of those people were derided as fringe, conspiracy theorists. So are there lessons learned, looking back about how we discuss theories when we don't have all of the answers?
So here's what I can tell you is the president's commitment to getting to the bottom of this, right? That is what's the most important, so that we can share this with Congress, we can share this with the American people. That is why he asked the IC to do its work. And right now, there is no consensus. There is no consensus.
Well, some criticize the DOE's expertise on the matter. It's important to note that the Energy Department does have a special division that, as part of its mission to track and mitigate the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, specializes in the study of biological weapons, such as viruses, which is an interesting point to note. I was curious about that, too, because I think there are 8 agencies that are all kind of independently tasked with getting to the bottom of it. I think that's what they mean when they say there's no consensus. Sure, this is one of those 8 agencies that's come to this determination, but that's kind of missing the forest for the trees, because what's so critical for those of us who've been talking about this for 2 years now is the way that even an interrogation of this theory as a possible explanation for the start of COVID was dismissed as crazy, conspiratorial, fringe, right-wing, and to even talk about it. I remember I did an episode of my podcast about it, I think in June of 2001, and there was so much pushback and hand-wringing about how, now you've sold out and you're insane because you've even raised the topic.
No, it was crazy. Yes, it's all fair to say this is by no means the final word on the subject. We still don't know for certain. It was a low confidence projection. They're now one of 2 federal agencies that are now leaning in the direction of lab leak. The FBI has also reached that conclusion with moderate confidence. So things are trending in the direction of greater confidence in lab leak theory, but absolutely a lot more investigating needs to be done. No one should rule out the alternative theory. But this is it's like people are waking up, and by people, I mostly mean people in the media, because honestly, the White House has not necessarily been responsible for trying to tamp down lab leak speculation. Joe Biden has said it should be investigated, and that he does not trust everything he hears from the Chinese. So that was not controversial or political. The people who made it political were the mainstream media. I'm sorry, it was them. It was people who wrote in places like the Washington Post and the New York Times and on CNN previously, years ago, about how you were a racist conspiracy theorist for asking these questions. It didn't make any sense for them to take that posture, but because people like Senator Tom Cotton, who's a Republican, were being particularly vocal, not saying that the Chinese deliberately released it to kill America, just saying that we have a lot of concerns that it could have accidentally emerged from a lab, and we don't really trust the Chinese government to tell us exactly what happened. That should have been totally uncontroversial. And people started covering for the Chinese government in saying, wait, you're a racist if you think that.
Yeah, that racist aspect of it was so fascinating. I saw some commentators pointing out that if anything, the implication that like Chinese, animal,
That's
eating
the racially problematic
was as or more racist.
Especially because the lab leak theory also impugns U.S. funding priorities because we funded this research on bats on coronaviruses in Wuhan. I mean, the lab leak is like the anti-racist theory. It's inclusive of different people of different races, and it's not people-based. It's about institutions that failed.
Which is arguably why so many of our institutions. I mean, you point to the media as being the group that ran cover against the lab leak theory. But it was also a lot of people in the scientific community. I remember when Jeffrey Sachs, he spearheads Lancet Science Magazine's investigation into COVID. And that was controversial. He received pushback. There was pushback within the medical community, especially because here was someone of, kind of public esteem, political esteem, at an esteemed medical journal, opening up the door to the possibility that lab leak theory was legitimate. And all of that just seemed too, I think, official because in that context, that particular medicalized, specialized context, that was completely antithetical to say anything about lab leak theory being legitimate.
Because of the pressure coming from mainstream media relying on certain health officials, you were literally not allowed to discuss the lab leak theory on Facebook. Facebook had a policy of blanket blocking such content because of the unanimity of the pressure from mainstream media on the subject. It's really crazy. I mean, this feels like a Galileo still saying, look, it moves. It moves. I'm sorry.
And I saw you scrapping it up with some people.
Yeah, I got into it on Twitter.
And I almost feel bad for folks because I have, not on this issue, but on some other issues, I have been the one that has basically accepted the narrative that's been coming down, the mainstream media. Everybody believes this thing. The scientists all believe. I don't have time to nitpick at every single thing that's going on, and have later realized, oh, shoot, they were misleading things. They were lying to me about things. And so I see people that are going through this cognitive dissonance right now because they have been gaslit for years now about the possibility of this being true.
Well, speaking of, late night television hosts had a field day mocking the Department of Energy's reporting last night. Take a look.
Now, if, like me, you're wondering why the Department of Energy is the one making this judgment, it's because that agency oversees a network of U.S. national laboratories, some of which conduct advanced biological research. No. Bad energy department. No biolabs until you finish building your electric car charging stations. Stay in your lane. You don't see the Census Bureau building nukes. But whatever. Who am I to say? They're the energy department. I'm sure they're smart. They wouldn't release these findings unless they were absolutely confident. What's that? They made their judgment with low confidence. Yeah.
How can you conclude something with low confidence? That's not a conclusion. I think the word you're looking for is guess. By the way, conclusion with low confidence is such a boy move. You know what I mean? Like you're dating someone and they go, babe, what are we? And you're like, Sarah, I can tell you for sure, I don't know.
That was some coping. That was some coping. I mean, look, right, and they're in that position of trying to say, but it's low confidence because they got so over their skis in saying it was crazy to think it in the first place. Like on the other side, right, we're not saying we know for sure and it's proven that it's a lab leak. We're saying we need to further investigate it. It's a compelling possibility. They're the ones now, and they have to try to poke holes at it because they went so crazy the other way. I mean, remember when Colbert got absolutely destroyed by Jon Stewart on his own show over lab leak? When Jon Stewart started saying maybe like what did he say? He said if there was an accident at like a chocolate river gushing everywhere, and there was a chocolate factory next door, wouldn't you think maybe it came from the chocolate factory? It was a great clip, and Colbert was just like flabbergasted. It was uncomfortable that he was saying this.
Because the mainstream narrative has been not that we have low confidence or moderate confidence that it probably wasn't lab leak. It was absolutely not lab leak, and anybody who thought it was is crazy and maybe even racist.
Oh. Well, over on CNN, former White House COVID response coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx seemed more willing than the late-night TV host to accept the DOE's findings.
What do we know now about this virus, how it mutates, how it spreads through humans? What do we know that China was doing? And it makes total sense that China was working on a vaccine and growing these viruses in tissue culture. That changes the virus over time. That's what you do in the laboratory. And so it makes sense.
Are we doing enough now as a country? Is the United States doing enough to prevent this from happening again?
No.
And I was watching CNN last night, and they were covering it quite a bit, but almost from we've just realized this is a possibility kind of standpoint. I mean, their coverage a year ago was so condemning of, and obviously it's a big network. I'm sure different people felt differently. Sure. I was watching Wolf Blitzer's coverage of it last night. It was perfectly adequate. Right, reflecting again, we are not confident about this. We don't know for sure. It needs more investigating. But this is one of the wilder media screw-ups, in my view, they going so far in saying you're crazy if you don't ever say this.
Do you think this has Trump derangement syndrome fingerprints on this? Is this because the theory emerges when Donald Trump is president because there's legitimacy coming from someone like Donald Trump? Because I remember there was this warring moment at the beginning of 2020 where Trump was being accused of xenophobia for saying anything related to the origins of COVID being China. At the same time, Biden, wrapping up the primary, issued an ad that was, I think, more genuinely actually xenophobic. It was a genuinely racist ad. And it was a weird moment because Trump's characterization of the virus as having a Chinese origin, and some of that, like Chinese virus, Wuhan virus, it was a necessary kind of framing, but just saying the virus originated in China was having people go into apoplectic shock in the media. But Joe Biden's sincerely xenophobic ad kind of flew under the radar. And I wonder if part of this defensiveness we're seeing now and the way that people really doubled down on not entertaining lab leak theory at all is because it just became one of those Trump-coded things very early and they weren't able to untangle themselves.
Well, it's important to remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, everything was opposite land. It was liberal media people downplaying the threat of the virus, saying that travel restrictions would be crazy. You're a fascist if you support them. And it was some certain conservative quarters who were very, very alarmed. But then also, right, as you said, Biden was very critical of the Chinese government. Trump was not universally critical of the Chinese government. He made several statements about how they're doing very, very well, and I'm working, in his kind of, we're working so close and they respect me, so I'm going to say nice things about them. Then eventually he took a more anti-Chinese. I mean, he's just inconsistent as he is with everything. So it certainly, but it didn't need to acquire the partisan framing it acquired, and it has caused some people in the mainstream to just lose their minds. I'm going to talk more about this in my radar. Some examples of people who I think really got this wrong, and I actually have a little bit of a scoop to share in my radar about the Global Disinformation Index and what they were doing on the subject, if you remember them.
So. Oh yeah, I can't wait, Robby.
All right, well, we will have more Rising right after this, so we'll be talking about this all day and lots of other things. We actually have Phil Wegman on, reporter for Real Clear Politics, to tell us what he asked the government about the lab leak theory at a press briefing yesterday. You won't want to miss any of that.